You are officially invited. Yes, you're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 8-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start in the first week of October. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam, FAM, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/fam. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 329. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. Today I'm sharing a brand new installment of my Fertility Awareness Reality series. Today I'm sharing my conversation with Emma, who is a current client in my Fertility Awareness Mastery Live program. And one of the topics that comes out in today's episode is fear, and specifically the fear around having sex when you're not on hormonal birth control. So this is certainly a theme that has come out in the podcast in a number of different ways and many different episodes, and particularly in this series. And the way it usually presents itself is for women who are coming off of hormonal birth control and are really, really terrified of making that switch, or even just in that contemplation stage of thinking about coming off hormonal contraceptives, but being just terrified that you're going to get pregnant the moment that your partner looks at you when you've stopped taking your hormonal birth control. And so in this episode, Emma shares how she managed her fertile window or I shouldn't say fertile window because she didn't have the knowledge of fertility awareness until recently. But in this episode, Emma shares how she managed her fertility prior to discovering fertility awareness. And it may be different to, the stories that you've typically heard about how women are managing their fertile window. But I think this story is extremely important to speak to the high degree of fear that is installed in women around getting pregnant. And it's really positioned in such a way that you're definitely going to get pregnant unless you're on the pill. And so if I stood to gain millions of dollars from the sale of a pharmaceutical drug, wouldn't it be fantastic for me to position my product as the only solution to this problem of wanting to control when you get pregnant and when you don't? And so, the take-home message from me is never that there's one method that you should choose over another, but it's always that really and truly, it's time as women to have all of our options made known to us and to be able to truly make that informed choice. And before we can even get to the point where we can make an informed choice about birth control, we need to know how our bodies work and dispel the myth that we're fertile every single day. And so for me, when I discovered fertility awareness, it was a huge weight off my shoulders to realize that there was only a small part of the cycle where pregnancy was possible. Because for me at the time, that really felt like, okay, I can manage this. I'm not fertile every single day. It's not like a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week for the rest of my life type of situation that I have to be scared all the time. It's really a period of time that I can identify and manage. And for me, that was like, oh, okay, this is way more reasonable than this concept that, pregnancy is like a terrorist that could get you at any time. And so that helped me through my 20s. And so I hope that today's episode and episodes like this one really help you just to expand the way that we're looking at our bodies, because obviously my experience has been that more and more of my clients are just absolutely terrified of getting pregnant. And it's just really demonstrating the effectiveness, I guess you could say, of the indoctrination that we are put through when we're growing up. So I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to jump right into today's episode with Emma. And I'm really excited to be here with Emma today. Emma was a member of my most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery program. We started in July, and we actually just finished 2 days ago. So welcome to the show, Emma.
Thank you. Thanks. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Anyone who listens to these episodes knows that I love recording them because it's fun for me because, of course, I love client work, but it really allows the audience to get an insight kind of to see what I see in my world all the time. And I know even in the class together, that's another purpose of doing it in that way, because when you're charting, you're typically seeing your own experience. And even if you're part of Facebook groups, you're seeing charts with no context. So it's nice to actually have that information, see what other women's cycles are like, but also have context, whichever way you're seeing. So I'd love to jump in and just give you an opportunity to share your own experience. If when you got your first period, what that was like, if you've used hormonal contraceptives before, and essentially what led you to wanting to jump into fertility awareness at this point in time.
Yeah, definitely. So I had my first period when I was 10 years old. And I'll always remember the day that it happened because it happened in the middle of the night, like in the morning that I had a big piano competition. And it was very, I had signs before then that it was coming, but the timing definitely left an impact. And everything went okay that day, but that will always be in my head as a marker. So I started menstruating at 10, and my periods were, when I was younger, they were heavier than they are now. And I did also have more pain than I do now. Even at that age, I guess as I got kind of older, later teens, 20s, I did start to see just naturally like patterns pop up with my periods where I did track like the day it started and stuff like that. So as for hormonal contraceptives, I always avoided hormonal contraceptives, but I always assumed that a time would come where I would have to use them to be able to have safe intercourse that is pregnancy-free. So I have been in a long-term relationship for almost 10 years, and we agreed that we would basically only practice alternative sex, so no intercourse in this relationship, because we both felt that like the intention risk for pregnancy was like -5. And so it just wasn't the right time to make that risk or to take that risk. And even with things like condoms and withdrawal, it just, we didn't know that there was a time of the month where like there is zero risk to get pregnant. And so it just always seemed like there would be a risk. And so I would read like in anticipation about the time where I would have to go on hormonal contraceptives. And so I would I kind of assumed like the pill would be the option for me. And so I would sometimes like read online about what the different options are, like the mini pill, the combination pill, just so like whenever I would have to go to the doctor, I would have some knowledge myself about this and wouldn't be totally blind. But I could just never get myself to take that step. And there were a few reasons for that. One was life timing. I was kind of in school forever, from undergrad and grad school, and it was a very intense time in my life, especially grad school. And I didn't want to throw in some likely pills that could alter or change my emotions or just my thinking or even physically in some way. So I just didn't want that added stress, I guess. And in general, I'm also just very conscious of what I put into my body. And lastly, I'm also kind of medically anxious. So what I mean by that is if I get sick, I'll go to the doctor if like I'm having trouble kicking something like a sinus infection, and if I need medication to help with that, fine. But I do avoid medication if I can. And I also just have struggled with like even getting blood drawn is a little challenging for me. I've gotten better over the years, but so medically I'm just kind of, yeah, I'm not necessarily the easiest patient in that way. The two good things that can come with that, though, are that it can make you a better advocate for yourself because you ask a lot of questions, and you also research things to a degree on your own, but hopefully not to a dangerous extent.
But yeah, it's these days, I would say it's more difficult for doctors, but it is good in that sense to be a difficult patient, in the sense that you are questioning things and you are always making sure that you're fully informed. And if anyone is listening is a difficult patient, air quotes, you've probably noticed that some doctors get irritated when you do this. And I would say it extends to anything. Like if you've ever been to a bank and they want you to sign documents and you read them, because I'm that annoying human.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting in our culture, society, whatever, where we're expected to go along with everything, sign documents, take pills, do all these things. And when you do ask questions, you're the weird one. So if you're the difficult patient, I would say it's a good thing, although it doesn't mean life will be easier. It'll be harder. But I think overall, it's good.
Yeah, definitely. So the second, I guess, kind of advantage of that is it did keep me off of hormonal contraceptives, which I don't think would have been a good fit for myself, also just because of the mental aspect. And it also, like with that, it kind of freed or motivated my partner and I to create a satisfying, great sex life for ourselves without intercourse. And a lot of people see intercourse, as the end all be all to that part of their life. And while that is a very special, satisfying thing on its own, the way things kind of ended up for us intimately, we were able to know and learn each other really well and at a very deep level, and still have a lot more to look forward to in our relationship. And, I've only been doing FAM for a year, and we've been together for 10 years. So it's been a very long journey, and I've had just a great supportive partner through it all. And with that, though, of course, we still have wanted to have intercourse. And it came to a time where things in my life were more steady, where throwing in some pills to try wouldn't seem as potentially upheaving if something like that did happen. But I just felt so trapped with the options. And I really wanted to be going to that, next stage in intimacy, but I just didn't want to do hormonal contraceptives. And so I went back to my good Jekyll and Hyde friend, the internet. And I don't know what I searched differently this time, but for some reason, I ended up on some message board on some website. Like I also kind of mentally blocked it out, which is frustrating because this was such a life-changing thing. But I saw on a message board, like someone talking about Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Tony Weschler. And then I read that, and that was my gateway into the wonderful world of fertility awareness, and then led me to all these other great resources as well, such as Fertility Friday with You and other books too. So.
Wow. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your experience, Emma. I feel like it's so valuable. I mean, I feel like a broken record, but this is one of the reasons why I love doing these sessions, because even though we were in a group together for, 8 weeks, and even though we had multiple sessions and we had our private sessions, and so we had lots of time together, I don't really get the full story unless I do this type of an interview. So I actually didn't realize that was a big part of your story and experience. And I feel that this is so important, this conversation. What I'm hearing from you essentially, and I think a lot of women feel those same feelings of, I want to be intimate, I don't want to risk pregnancy, but I feel that this is my only option. And so I think a lot of women, though, choose to jump in and do it. And even if they don't necessarily have a good experience, because as you know, I've also spoke to women who were on the pill for quite a while and did have negative side effects and were aware to some degree that the pill was likely causing it, but still felt, what else do I do? So you felt trapped and you didn't go on it, which then resulted in you and your partner adjusting your intimacy accordingly. And then other women will be on it and not be doing well on it, but also feel trapped because they don't really feel like they can come off. And this concept of you are, I mean, when I was growing up, I feel like it was a little bit less dire. I feel like it wasn't like you're either on the pill or pregnant, but somehow I feel like that's changed over the last 20 years. And the message somehow, however it's gotten in there, is basically like, if you're not on the pill, it's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
And that is highly, highly problematic. I mean, I've said this before on the podcast, but I grew up in the HIV/AIDS era where everyone was talking about condoms. And so I didn't get the impression that alternative non-hormonal methods wouldn't work at all. But then I also discovered fertility awareness, and you can combine those methods to help you to feel a lot more comfortable and confident, so that you know that whatever choice you make, whether it's hormonal or non-hormonal, it's legitimate and you can navigate it. So I want to ask this question because I imagine the listeners would want to hear the answer too. But looking back, if you had discovered fertility awareness quite some time ago, how do you think that would have changed the relationship with your partner?
That would have been great to have discovered it sooner. And I think, we probably would have entered the full world of intimacy earlier. So I think it would have changed things. I don't regret the path or anything like that, but I definitely would have been very happy to discover fertility awareness earlier, not only for the intimacy aspect, but just for the knowledge of my body. Because before fertility awareness, I really didn't have a lot of I didn't really know much information about my reproductive system and even just my area down there. Like, it got me to actually really look at, like my vulva and my vaginal opening and stuff like that, and learn the terminology and all of that. So it would have made a lot of things make more sense in being a woman. So
Well, and one other question for the listeners, because I do feel that I understand your hesitancy, and I don't feel that it's unreasonable, the choice that you made. I think that it's important to recognize, and it's because I've been doing this work for so long and I've had a lot of the conversations. I talk about the things you don't necessarily talk about with your girlfriends, with women all the time. So I think it's actually really important for people to hear these perspectives, because there's plenty of people listening right now who've never heard a perspective of somebody who was so hesitant to go on birth control. So then the question for the listeners is, why didn't you just do it? A lot of people, I interviewed Dr. Miranda Naylor several hundred episodes ago. And when I asked her, she's a doctor, and I was asking her about what she was taught about the pill. And I quote her in the fifth vital sign, because she was like, when I was in med school, and I'm paraphrasing, we were taught that it was kind of like a non-issue, like a vitamin, like something you would just take. And so most people think of it as just totally benign and wouldn't even think twice. So back to the question, in your case, what was the big deal? Why wouldn't you just go on it, right? For the listener.
Right. Yeah. A few reasons, though I think the biggest one is I was aware that there could be effects from it, and for me, it just didn't seem, this isn't the best phrasing, but it kind of weirded me out that I could take something that would alter my body like that in some way, though I didn't even know the details about it, like that it halts ovulation, and that the bleed isn't necessarily a period bleed, because that's what you hear all the time that it is.
Now.
Now, okay. Well, that's what I grew up hearing. I also heard experiences from some of my friends who were taking it. I remember one of my friends said the first pill that she tried, she was a monster. She was super depressed. And then she switched to the second one and she was totally fine and she felt normal. And a lot of people can, I believe, feel fine on the pills. But I think just because I have always been very conscious of like what I put in my body, not to say that those who take the pill aren't, but that, and then also just, yeah, the idea that like, yeah, even though I didn't totally understand it, just something like my instinct was telling me that it was just not natural and potentially not, the safest thing for me to be doing. And it was just kind of this gut feeling within me that it wouldn't be a good match. And I think also like the fact that my brain was already there. Sometimes if your brain is there and you try something, it could make things appear that aren't really there too. And I also had a really supportive partner and who just, who didn't want me to be uncomfortable with something. And we just worked together to make things work. So I didn't feel a lot of pressure from him, thank goodness, because that wouldn't be good. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
It does. It does. Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's really interesting and important. So, from what I heard you saying, I mean, the things that I would just love to highlight are it does seem like it was your intuition. You just had a sense, and it wasn't something that you could really, you had a challenging time trying to explain it because it was kind of this intuitive sense. And I think a lot of us have that. And this isn't to say that people who are using it, I mean, there's plenty of people who probably have an intuitive sense, like, this is what I need to do. So it's not to say that I just want to acknowledge our individuality and what each of us are comfortable with is different. And our experiences often shape this. So, but I think that part of it is really interesting because I do think that a lot of women have intuitive senses about birth control at different times in different ways. And so some women maybe the kind of hesitancy to take it because of that unknown, like how is it going to respond to me? And other women may have this intuitive, even fear of coming off of it for the unknown of how it's going to affect me later. And I think a lot of women have that intuitive sense when they're on it that maybe they should stop it for a period of time before they try to have a baby. I think a lot of women have that because I've spoken to so many women who schedule appointments with doctors and go to those appointments before their wedding or before whatever the case is when they're them and their partner are planning to have a baby. And then it's like your intuition spoke enough for you to book an appointment and go to the doctor. And then what happens from there, what the doctor says is a whole other thing. But I think many of us don't listen or we don't trust it or we're not there to the point that we're actually going to give that weight because you can't really explain it. And if challenged on it, you might say, well, I don't know. And then, you feel like your argument isn't that valid, even though your intuition is saying like, I don't know exactly what, but
yeah.
So I think, I just feel like this conversation is so important because if anything, one of the biggest aspects of charting that's kind of unexpected that I talk about all the time that I really end up focusing on a lot with clients inadvertently is this sense of connecting to your intuition, paying attention to your body, trusting those feelings that you can't really explain, listening to that little voice, even when you don't really understand it. And that would also involve kind of taking your time. If you ever have an interaction with a healthcare practitioner, it's like, you need to do this thing immediately. No, you don't. You can wait a day. You can wait a week. You know what I mean? You can sometimes wait a month or 6 months. And so listening to those voices is incredibly important, I think, as we go through our lives.
Definitely.
Well, Emma, I mean, I feel like we've covered so much ground.
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten into the session part, but I really, really appreciate it because this is a perspective that I don't think has ever been shared on the podcast. I think it's just really important for everyone to hear. So moving on to the session part of the session. So now you've been using fertility awareness for about a year and we covered a ton of ground in our class together. So let's jump in. Let me know where you'd like to start and what you'd like to focus on today.
Do you mean like in regards to like what on my chart I'd like to talk about?
Well, whatever you'd like to talk about.
Okay.
So when we had our hot seat sessions together and our classes, in class sessions, yeah, I know we talked about a variety of things regarding your cycle and your charts and a few different things that could be affecting it and stress. And so I know that we did cover a lot of ground. So I know a lot of your questions were answered, which is one of the challenges of doing one of these sessions towards the end of the class, because we've covered a lot together. But were there any questions that you had or anything that was still kind of outstanding that you were hoping to address?
I'd like to talk about maybe the bleeding that I had post-period during my pre-ovulatory phase. I know we talked about that a bit during class and that it could be stress-related, but I guess I'd also like to talk a bit more about, if I do see this pop up every 3 or 4 months or so, because I've seen it happen in that pattern the past two to three times the past year. So it'd be great to talk a bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so in our last session together, which I think was a week or two ago, you brought this up. And so for the listeners who can't see your charts, you had a cycle where you had your period and then you had a little bit of bleeding around ovulation, which is not typical for you. Is that what we're referring to in this cycle here?
Yeah, so sometimes I do get ovulatory spotting, but this was after my period. I basically had brown mucus and then brown spotting, where like enough to wear a panty liner for a couple days. And then it also turned red for 2 days and then back to brown and then eventually tapered off.
Mm-hmm. Well, and on your chart here, so your period lasted 7 days because you had a couple days of like the brown bleeding afterwards. And then you marked 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more days as brown.
Yes.
So that's a lot of bleeding. And when we were looking at it, so it's not something that like in the previous cycle, you didn't have that at all. But it's something that you mentioned several months before you had actually had that. And so when we were talking about it in our session, it sounded like it could potentially be related to stress in the sense that you were having a bit of a stressful month and those types of things. And to give some context, I mean, there's a variety of different reasons why women may experience spotting throughout the cycle. It's certainly not normal to have, 8 additional days of bleeding in addition to your period. And so when I've worked with women who experience this, I've certainly worked with women who have gut issues or other problems where they're actually significant food sensitivities or things of that nature, gut dysbiosis, various issues. And when they encounter those allergens that cause inflammation and kind of disrupt the gut dysbiosis, I've seen that actually cause bleeding in the cycle. That could be an example of why certainly stress, certainly hormonal disruptions. It's not uncommon to have a day or two of spotting around ovulation, but that's typically related to that rapid rise of estrogen, and it typically doesn't last 8 days. And then on the kind of more serious end of the spectrum, certainly abnormal bleeding can be a sign of serious issues, whether it's something relatively benign like a uterine polyp or fibroids or something like that, but it could also be on the more severe end, being something like cancer. But with that said, if you have a legitimate serious issue like that, it's probably not going to be a random cycle of bleeding that one time. That would be something of concern when you're seeing a pattern of consistent bleeding kind of all the time. So with all of that said, I wouldn't jump to any conclusions. So when we were talking about this last time, I certainly suggested that it's certainly warranted when you have abnormal bleeding, particularly if it's something that is not just one time and it's kind of showing up here and there. It's certainly warranted to the next time you go to your doctor, ask for a full ultrasound, tell them that you had some concerning bleeding that was not your period or bleeding throughout the month. And that is probably be enough for some practitioners, but you can also just ask for the ultrasound and ask if there are any other types of testing that could be done, any other types of screening. And so certainly it's warranted to do that. And then from my end, if it's something to do with stress or something that was different, then as we did in our session, so you can kind of refresh my memory, what, if anything, was different this cycle and then the previous time, so several months back when you had a similar bleeding episode, were there any similarities between those two cycles in terms of what was happening in your life or diet or exercise or anything that could be causing stress?
I would say so. In April, when this previously happened, there was something specific going on. And then this past month, something specific as well. So I could definitely see where it was potentially like certain events that I guess maybe stressed me out where this could happen. So, yeah.
Well, and without giving any, details or anything, this event, like, was it kind of a severe emotional stressor that was kind of similar both times, or was it more of like physical thing, like just to get the similarities between it? Because if it is something like that, then you typically see it, like if it's something, I'll just give a random like example, but if you have like a horrible boss, I feel like I'm always picking on bosses in my stress examples. So shout out to the good bosses. But if you have a horrible boss and they, you have these episodes where, every couple of months they just freak out and it's horrible and it's really stressful and it causes you not to be able to sleep very well and you're dreading going to work. And like, if though, and that is kind of the depth, because that would be pretty severe. And that type of situation is kind of associated around the time when you're having these disruptions, then I would say it's more likely to be something like that versus if you had like a physical problem in your uterus, that's not going to matter whether your boss is yelling at you, you're just going to bleed.
Right. I do have a question about that. If it was something other than stress, would I see bleeding more throughout the cycle? Like, could it happen during the luteal phase as well? Or would it be, because both times it's just been during pre-ovulation, so not during my luteal phase. So would it be, is that more of a sign that it's stress, or could something actually physical going on also have that pattern?
I would say, it's certainly possible. So, everybody's different. So I can't, definitively say yes in every case, but it's certainly possible because I've certainly seen stress cause bleeding post-ovulatory. So hormonally, before ovulation, estrogen is the dominant hormone and estrogen builds the uterine lining. So you have a uterine lining that is proliferating and growing and becoming thicker. And then in the post-ovulatory phase, progesterone kicks up and it's not like estrogen disappears. So you still have both. But progesterone kicks up and it really helps to mature the uterine lining. And so when you are experiencing situations that are stressful or even physical situations, so there's, stress is a broad category. In the post-ovulatory phase, stress tends to have a negative effect on our progesterone production. And so that can result in a shorter cycle, meaning that your luteal phase is shorter and your period comes before is typical. So on average, 12 to 14 days after ovulation is when the period will come in a healthy cycle. So if you're experiencing a lot of stress, the period could actually come sooner. And so for some women, in addition to that possibility of the period coming sooner, so the shortening of the luteal phase, they may also experience this premenstrual spotting. So I've definitely seen women who have stress, whether it's like, I decided to take up CrossFit and now I'm working out 7 days a week, Tuesdays twice or whatever. And that kind of causes several days of bleeding before your period starts. Or if it's an actual, different type of stressor, or, there's all these different reasons and all possibilities. But the short answer to your question is yes, it's possible.
Okay. Thank you.
It's hard for me to answer questions like shortly because there's so many different possibilities. I'm trying to, incorporate it. But I and it's hard to say like, the situation that happened, is it something that you anticipate might happen every now and then?
It could. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like, if I work on mentally, like how I handle it, I think the stress would improve. So it's not a boss or anything like that. So it's just like things that pop up. And even if it was a boss, if you work on how you handle it mentally, that could help with the stress. So.
Yeah. In that case, if it does happen again and you notice that pattern, I mean, this is not ideal to be like, okay, so induce the stressor again and see if you have bleeding. But that's something certainly to watch for. That would be
Okay.
a sign where if this bleeding is happening in response to this stressful situation and outside of those particular situations, it doesn't happen at all. So that's a really big sign. And I think for a lot of my clients over the years, it's really striking when you have this type of situation because it's kind of like the first time in your life that you're like, whoa, this is like real. I don't actually have like a uterine polyp. The stress is causing this. And that's powerful
Mm-hmm.
because it's like, wow, this thing that's happening in my life could really have this significant impact. And when it is something like the crappy boss example, this can be the thing that legitimizes those feelings that you've had, kind of like, oh wow, this isn't okay. And now your body's saying it's not okay. And you're like, okay, this is legit. So for a lot of women, it's kind of like, it's hard to not accept, but that's kind of the word that comes to mind. It's kind of hard to acknowledge that situations like this could cause a legitimate and predictable, in a way, change in your cycle. And then, of course, there are the women who we go through all these things and how stress can affect the cycle. And then when they do experience a stressful thing, they're like waiting for it and they don't have it. So don't have the cycle shift or change. So obviously, there's no experience that's the same for everybody, but I feel like at this point, it's certainly possible that it could be that.
Okay.
It's also possible that you could have some sort of underlying physical thing and this exacerbates it.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's a good idea whenever you're having abnormal bleeding and it's not like just the one time and you're concerned about it, it's always a good idea to see your doctor and have some testing because, of course, why wouldn't we err on the side of caution and
Right.
continue to watch it? And you mentioned there's some ways that you can manage your stress. I wouldn't be too hard on yourself. Anything that could potentially cause this type of an issue is probably quite a challenge. So I'd be gentle and kind to yourself
Yeah.
and not be too worried about, am I handling this perfectly? You're probably handling it as wonderfully as possible. And the fact that you're thinking about all the things you could do to mitigate your stress response already speaks volumes. So just a note to be kind to yourself.
Oh, well, thank you.
But yeah, so it's one of those things, and this is one of the ways, obviously, that the menstrual cycle can be used as a vital sign. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that you can see the bleeding and be like, absolutely, let's make a diagnosis, and this is exactly what's wrong, because that's never the case. But it
Right.
certainly does give us that heads up information that if you weren't really paying attention to it, you'd probably notice that you were bleeding. But, I could see women who don't necessarily chart, and they could just like, man, I had a long period this cycle.
Yeah,
And kind of that being
definitely.
the end of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the really valuable things about charting is that you can see where this was where your period was, and then that this other thing might be going on. And if you go to the doctors, be able to provide them a lot more specific information so that you can potentially get to the root cause a lot easier.
I wanted to jump into today's episode to invite you to join us for the next round of Fertility Awareness Mastery Live. This 8-week group coaching program is designed to help you unlock the secrets of your menstrual cycle. Fertility Awareness Mastery teaches you everything you need to know about using fertility awareness cycle tracking to achieve your intentions. Whether you're currently trying to get pregnant, avoiding pregnancy, or planning to conceive in the future, we've got you covered. This program goes deep. Get to the root of your period problems, hormone imbalances, fertility challenges, and so much more. Early bird registration is now open, but only for a limited time. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/fam, F-A-M, to register today. That's fertilityfriday.com/fam. Now let's jump back into today's episode. Mm-hmm. Well, and I always shudder when I hear women say things like, yeah, my period, they lasted 2 weeks, or my period lasted 3 weeks. And I'm like, no, it didn't. Your
Yeah.
period never lasts 3 weeks. So
Gosh,
if
yeah.
bleeding can last 3 weeks, but that's not your period. So not for that entire time. And basically like 100% of the time when you're bleeding for longer than 7 days, there's something. It doesn't always mean that it's the most severe option of what we discussed. And those are some of the possibilities. There's other possibilities, of course, not least of which, endometriosis, adenomyosis. There's a variety of other issues that could potentially cause this type of bleeding that we didn't necessarily mention. But it reminds me of an example also from the book, and it just came up. It's not me trying to be like book, but it's in there. And it was a woman who, her friend had been bleeding for 6 months straight, and she had gone to the doctors, and I think maybe not had been taken that seriously. So she kind of thought it was kind of like a pain in the butt. But then it turned out that she had uterine cancer when
Oh
she actually
gosh,
was
yeah.
identified. And so it's not to say that when you're bleeding is uterine, like this is not the point, obviously. But the point is that we should be at the stage in our human development where we are aware that there is such a thing as a normal period, and bleeding outside of that consistently. And so kind of not just that one day of spotting, or not just that one weird cycle that was associated with that stressful event, but like a consistent pattern of abnormal bleeding. We should check that out. Like, I feel like we should at least be there where we should be like, you know what? You should check that out.
Definitely.
Pretty basic stuff here.
I know,
You would
yeah.
think. Oh man. But so I wanted to check in with how comfortable you are with the method itself and the rules. I know we went into a ton of depth, but particularly after hearing your story. So you, for the listeners who didn't catch it at the beginning, when you were like, I'm -5 on the scale. So we always talk about the intention scale, with 0 being you're not open to having babies right now, and 10 being you're trying already, and you're probably waiting to see if you are pregnant this cycle. And so -5 means that at least at the time, and what I always say is check in each cycle because it can shift, but at least at the time, it was just not something. You mentioned you were in grad school, you had things going on. And I also know it's really common for clients who are transitioning to fertility awareness. It's a huge mental hurdle to, you can read all the science, you can read all the books, you can take the class, and you can understand like your head knowledge, like you can understand that pregnancy is not possible, and you could
Mhm.
probably draw diagrams. But when it comes to actually being comfortable with having sex and trusting the method, that is a whole other step. That's a leap. So I'm curious as to where you are with your comfort level there at this point, how you're managing your fertile window, and if you wanted to go through any of those rules or anything like that we talked about.
Yeah. So for most cycles, I feel like, especially since working with you in the class, I'm able to clearly see my luteal phase. I can confirm ovulation, and that comfort is fairly recent since working with you in the class and learning the Justice method, which I really, really like because it just cleared up questions and confusion I had regarding mucus when I was doing other methods before this method. And so right now because it is still the Justice and that comfort level is still fairly new, we're keeping things in the luteal phase. And so I haven't gotten to that hurdle of unprotected in the luteal phase. So yeah, it totally makes sense. Like the science is there. And I mean, getting over that hurdle is challenging, even though like I can totally see my cycles, they fit. I have my pre-ov temperatures, my post-ovulation temperatures, my mucus pattern, like it's there, but it is challenging to make that jump. And I do think that we will get there eventually, especially, now that I have that extra confidence with charting. But yeah, it's challenging to do unprotected in luteal phase because I feel like there can still be like those voices like quietly whispering in your head.
The fear is real, ladies. So this is why I talk about this, because I've certainly in the class multiple times. So I'm not, if anyone's listening and you're like, I said this in the class, it is not just you, because this is a thing that comes up basically every single time. There's someone who will be like, their idea of unprotected is withdrawal. And it's like, what do you mean? My partner could ejaculate inside of my body. And so again, this isn't, so I'm never going to tell you what to do. In the class, what I always say is that, so there's a natural progression that women go through. And of course, I put some structure around it in the class. But when women are learning fertility awareness, like stage 1 is learning. So stage 1 is no unprotected sex. And that can last for 1 cycle minimum if you're working with an instructor, 3 cycles minimum if you're working on your own, learning on your own. That would be my recommendation, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Everyone's going to make their own choices. And then the second stage is actually once you've learned. So once you have the skills, you know how to chart, you understand your mucus and your temperature and how they relate, you understand the rules, you understand why they work, you know the biology. So you're good in the headspace of knowing. At that point, then every individual woman will have a sense of when she's ready to move forward. And at that point, so just to kind of normalize this for you and to make it a little bit easier, I use the analogy of like jumping into a hot tub, like a really hot tub, like a tub that is scalding. So you don't, like nice, but still hot. I don't recommend for you to like dive headfirst into the hot tub, especially if you're feeling really nervous about it. So it's really not uncommon for clients of mine to, once they start feeling comfortable, they've charted a minimum of 1 full cycle, no unprotected, particularly if they're learning the method for the first time, because I also work with clients who've been using the method, usually only in the post-ovulatory. But, the first time you do this, it's terrifying. It's your whole life of programming. You were told that you could get pregnant every day. And I was able to break out of that when I was like 18. So maybe it was easier for me because I had just the 18 years of programming.
Yeah.
Not the additional like 10. I totally get it. But it's like ripping a Band-Aid off. But it's really common for some of my clients to actually, they'll wait. So they'll confirm ovulation, they'll confirm the rules. So the peak +4 rule, the temperature rule, so the 3 high temperatures type of thing. So they'll confirm the rules and then they'll proceed to wait until like the day before their period is actually coming and then have sex on that day. And they're still terrified. Like they're still like, it's because this is an emotional thing. It's not a rational thing. And when their period comes, even after they've had the freak out attack, because that's also like, I'll kind of warn about it. I talk about it in the class and it's like, it's normal to be nervous. And even if you don't think you're going to be, it's really normal because this is part of our conditioning. And a big part of this class is me helping to, talk you off the ledge. It's okay. And so, it'd be like, oh, I think I'll be fine. And then, the next class, oh my gosh. But then your period comes. And so that is when you start to cross the threshold between your head knowledge and your experiential knowing. So the difference between you right now and me, or, not necessarily even someone who's a teacher, who's seen multiple women's experiences, but, any woman who has been using fertility awareness for some time and has been having fully unprotected ejaculation inside. I'm being descriptive for a reason. But any woman who's been doing it, so legitimately using the method and it's been working for them. So they're at a different level of experience. And so for those women, it's not a theory. It's not a concept because It's like, I follow the rules and I have unprotected sex once I've confirmed ovulation and done my cross-check and I get my period. And then I did this again and again. And now it's been 5 years. In my case, it's been like 20. So it's a different level of knowledge, but just because I'm comfortable doesn't mean you're comfortable. And so that's why I really encourage you to take some time. So hopefully this conversation has given you permission to, ease into it. And so, like I said, it's not uncommon for like the first time to wait until like you've confirmed it. And so it's really important. You know all the rules. We went through all that, but to kind of give yourself that like, okay, my period's coming tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think you can do this. And then you can take as much time as you need to feel comfortable. And of course, when we talk about this a lot in the class, but with fertility awareness, it's not the same as like an IUD. Like when you get an IUD, you just get it in and then it's in. And there's nothing to learn. because it's in. But with fertility awareness, you have to actually learn it. And so you do it in stages. So stage 1 is post-ovulatory, because that's the part of the cycle where pregnancy is not possible. Just to be clear, it's not. There's plenty of podcast episodes that talk about the biology, so I'm sure, but it's not. It might sound like a strange thing to say, but it's impossible. Once you've confirmed ovulation, followed the rules with this method, post-ovulation, there's no egg, there's no baby. Pre-ovulatory, though, that's the only time when pregnancy can happen. So you really have to be specific in terms of how you're managing that. So you have to understand the rules, you have to understand mucus. And we talked about some additional measures that you can take to ensure that the pre-ovulatory phase, you're being very, very cautious, especially when you're -5 on the scale. But yeah, so hopefully that's helpful.
Definitely. Yeah. And I feel like we will get there. I think it'll take a little time. And I think also I can see us doing it like right before my period starts as well, like using that as the first time, just for that, to have that comfort sooner, I guess. And then over time, extending it before that, day by day. And yeah, so I'm confident we'll get there.
Yeah. And there's no right way to do this. It's really what you're comfortable with. So when I'm working with clients, everyone is different. So I have clients who are comfortable. They're just like gung-ho. And I have clients who, especially, like I said, especially as I progress, I feel like there's just a different message that women have been getting. Basically, women are scared to death. Like whatever the drug companies have been putting out in terms of information, or the sex ed teachers, women are scared to death. And so another way to kind of rip off the Band-Aid slowly could be, and I'm not saying this is the way, I'm just giving it as an example, but if you were using condoms with your partner, then you use condoms on your infertile days. And then, some couples will actually move to withdrawal, and they'll do that for a while. And I'm talking about like after you've confirmed ovulation on the days that you can't get pregnant, using withdrawal. So the first step is being aware that that's 2 methods.
Right. Yeah.
That's the first step, to be aware that when you use a condom on an infertile day, or when you use withdrawal on an infertile day, you're using 2 methods because it's an infertile day. And that's even a mental shift, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
So there's lots of ways to kind of gradually get comfortable with it. And like I said, I feel for every woman in my experience it's been that she has that sense of when she feels comfortable. So it's not my job to tell you need to, because you don't need to do anything. It's really up to you to tune into your own intuition and comfort level to decide how you're going to approach this. So there's plenty of women who are listening who may have approached this completely differently, who may not have taken as much time. And then there are plenty of women who are listening who took way more time and years to get comfortable. And everything is okay as long as you are comfortable, your partner's comfortable, and you're really achieving your intentions, which is intimacy without the risk of pregnancy, or to whatever degree you're comfortable.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So love these conversations. I'm excited for people to hear this episode. I feel like this is really like, I could see it being mind-blowing. Like if this is someone's first episode listening to this podcast, I could see this being like a mind-blowing.
Well, good. Yeah. I hope it helps some people.
It definitely will. Well, so I'm glad we touched on that a little bit. And yeah, I think that because you and your partner did spend quite a bit of time using alternative sex, which is one of the great options for managing your fertile window. So when you know you're actually fertile, of course, you can use condoms. You can use other barrier methods like diaphragm cervical cap. I always mention withdrawal, not because I'm advertising it, but because it's like the dirty little secret of like half the couples in the world. I hear all the stories. So if you use withdrawal, you're not alone, and you don't have to be ashamed of it, because it's actually a method that has an up to 96% effectiveness rate, surprisingly, when used correctly. I mean, that's not what they told us in high school, is it?
No, yeah. I didn't even know it was a method until getting into the fam world.
Yeah. Well, and it can be so effective for some couples that, they wonder if they're infertile until they have unprotected sex on a fertile day and discover that they are fertile. And it actually was a method that was working. But yeah, so in addition to those methods, alternative sex, certainly non-penetrative sex, and making sure that there's no contact between semen and cervical mucus, those are all really important options to be aware of so that you and your partner can decide how you're comfortable with managing those days that you are fertile. So I think for many couples who have relied basically exclusively on hormonal contraceptives, that can be a pretty big challenge because it's a shift. So some couples, and again, so I've heard a lot of stories. So there's plenty of couples who will not have sex for months when they come off of hormonal contraceptives, not have sex at all, because obviously the same exact feeling of being just terrified and not really understanding, really wanting to make sure that you're good and you understand, particularly when you're transitioning to fertility awareness, and even just not trusting barrier methods. So there's plenty of women who use fertility awareness that do not trust barrier methods and fully just abstain from sex during the fertile window. And then there's other couples who use withdrawal all the way through. So that's why I try to present this like objective, like non-biased approach, because there are so many different iterations of what people are comfortable with and what this looks like. And the great thing is that it gives you these options. Like you can really, once you know about the non-hormonal options and the hormonal options that we all know about, then it really gives you the opportunity to choose, to make a choice about what is going to work for you and your partner. And I feel like when you choose birth control and you don't know A, about the hormonal methods, and B, that they actually can be very effective when you are informed, then I feel like you can't actually make that choice.
Yeah. No, you can't.
Yeah, because if you really just believe that nothing works except the pill, that's not true. So you can't actually make a choice if you don't know all of the options. And it actually does sadden me to see how things have changed to the point that so many, individuals just don't even think that non-hormonal options are effective, because there's also the category of people that we don't talk about on the podcast are the people who just don't use hormonal contraceptives and don't know about fertility awareness and just like use condoms
right
for years and don't get pregnant. And so I think when you were sharing when I asked you like the question for the audience of like, why did you just take it? I really resonated with a few of the things that you said. So one was the intuitive sense. So I had already been on the pill, but my intuition was kind of like, I was on the pill for period pain and stuff. So my intuition was like, it's not fixing it. So maybe I shouldn't be on it so that I can figure out what's wrong if I want to have kids someday. So my intuition was talking to me, but obviously in a different way. But also I had several experiences like indirectly with friends. I had friends who went on the pill and like it drove them nuts, like you said, and had to come off within weeks.
Wow.
I had friends who used it and would say things like, well, geez, obviously it works because I never want to have sex. So I saw it with my eyes. I saw how it affected some women, obviously not all women, but I saw the emotional effects. I saw the libido effects and all these different things. And so I certainly had that kind of sense of like,
Right.
And so I think that's why this type of forum is helpful, to hear different experiences, because you can't experience everything in life. It's really helpful to be able to learn from other people's experiences.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't want to experience everything in life. Thank you. Everything? No, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, as we bring our call to the close today, did you have any other questions or comments or anything else that you wanted to dive into?
If it's okay, I wanted to just share like a really small experience that happened when I went to the doctors.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I went to the doctors at one point about the irregular bleeding that we've talked about. And I saw a midwife, and she told me that we didn't come to any conclusions about it. And so I didn't get a bunch of tests or anything like that. But she did say that she wanted to know like my motivation for coming in. And because she said that a lot of, what she would typically do if there's bleeding that you don't want, she was like, I'd put people on hormonal birth control and then they don't have to deal with that anymore. And then she said to me, she was like, but I don't want to put you on hormonal contraceptives because you are doing all this great charting and you're so aware of your body. And I mean, I appreciated that respect, but I also, it made me think about how if women had this knowledge, how I wonder how it would change doctor perspectives on patients and just kind of those, just how would it change things? Because, would there be more doctors or midwives with that sort of response? I just thought it was really interesting to have that sort of feedback from her.
Well, I think for a lot of, people listening at this point, they might be shocked that a midwife would say that. In our last session, we talked briefly about this concept of choosing a healthcare provider. And I love everybody, all professions. Love you guys. But within every profession, even if we're talking about like fishermen, within every profession, there are individuals who have specialized in certain areas and are really gifted in supporting patients in certain ways. And there's other practitioners who maybe are not as specialized in certain areas and don't necessarily have the expertise to deal with your specific situation. So that's a very gentle way of saying that although it might be surprising to hear someone say, like, I had this experience with a midwife where I went with abnormal bleeding and they suggested that I go on the pill so that I don't have to worry about it, without even the part of the conversation that's like, maybe this isn't normal and you should be checked out, like that. So you already know. I'm not even going to say it, okay? Just say it. Just deep breaths, deep breaths.
Yeah.
This is the reality of our healthcare system. And this is the reality about how individuals are trained. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's important for us to just take control of our health, learn as much as we can. That's why I've done, what I can to put out good resources and things like that. Because if we're going to wait until midwifery school everywhere is really up to date, or if we're going to wait until the, medical school is totally like period positive, then I think we're going to be waiting for a really long time. So I think there's a lot of value in just learning what you can when you go to your doctor, having conversations, not trying to change their perspective, but maybe just so that they can actually have the experience of having a patient who charts. And maybe that will kind of somehow kind of at least alert them to the fact that there's other stuff going on. It made me think of a recent comment that I had in one of my groups. And I don't have it in front of me or anything, but she basically said that she saw either an article recently or had a conversation with someone recently who, it was a doctor who basically had the opinion that, so it's not, I don't know if it's PC, so, trigger warning. I don't even know why you have to do that, but here we are. But it was like lesbian women are more likely to get ovarian cancer because they're not using birth control, because they're like less likely to be on the pill because they don't need like birth control, right? Because if you're having sex, if you're a woman having sex with a woman, well, if there's no like penis involved, then obviously you wouldn't need birth control in that traditional sense. So these are the assumptions, right? I'm not saying anything. I'm trying to repeat what I saw as a comment, but it was like, lesbian women, because they're not using the pill for birth control, are less likely to be on it, and therefore they're going to have all these cycles, these unproductive cycles.
Wow.
And then therefore that causes them to be more likely to get ovarian cancer. So they should have hysterectomies.
Oh my gosh.
And that would be better. And she was like,
wow.
What's your opinion about that? And I was like, but I think we just have to be very aware of the fact that this is insane. The message being that there's something wrong with our bodies. And unless we're actively procreating, then these are wasted cycles that are increasing our risk of ovarian cancer. No.
Yeah.
The menstrual cycle is a sign of health, and it's a part of being a female human. It's just a part of that. So that's my answer. And it's time for us to challenge it. To me, it's laughable, but that's because I've been in this field for so long. And you can see it. You can see how the menstrual cycle really does reflect health. And I can see on a day-to-day basis when working with clients that when the menstrual cycle is off, there is something off. There's never been a time where, I'm working with someone who just doesn't have their period and everything's totally fine. It's not totally fine. There's always a reason for this. So this idea that we're just men without testes is just not even a thing. And it's time for us to move on. And it is sad that our medical system isn't there yet, but we just got to do what we can, educate ourselves and empower others. And that's how we do it, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh man. All right. So before we wrap up today, I just wanted I usually ask a couple of questions just to kind of wrap up. And so one of the questions I would have for you is for the woman who's kind of in the reverse, but very similar situation as you, who is on the pill and is equally scared of conceiving when she's not ready as you were, but she's thinking about coming off of it. What, if anything, would you want her to know?
That's a good question. I would say that if she's thinking of coming off of the pill, that you'll be able to get through it, and you will be kind of learning and going back to a healthy, natural state of your body where you'll be able to learn so much, and I think probably appreciate what happens in your body, even if it's challenging initially with the post pill, with being post pill. I think that it is very likely worth it to get in touch with yourself in that way, and that you will make it to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as someone who has been avoiding pregnancy for a long time without hormonal contraceptives, what would you like? Would you have a statement about the possibility of that?
I would say that, if you're going to be using FAM, follow the rules and also trust in the rules, learn the method, and do what you're comfortable with. And then also, I did alternative sex and I do it for so long. Don't rule that out because that can be very enjoyable as well. And you can learn a lot about yourself and your partner in that way too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a lot of when women discover FAM in particular and they experiment with that, it's a thing. Many women find that it's like very pleasurable and very fun. So yay, yay for alternative sex. And so last question of the day for a woman who's thinking about joining the Fertility Awareness Mastery program, the live program, and she's kind of wondering what it's like. What, if anything, would you want her to know about your experience?
Yeah, so I would say that the live FAM Mastery class is an awesome experience. And I think it's really valuable. When I was looking to take a FAM class, I specifically wanted a group class that ideally where you could see everyone. And I think it's really valuable to be in a group of like-minded women like that, because it does build a bit of a community. It does help you. It helps you feel more comfortable with yourself also, because you're talking about things with people that you're getting to know over the course of the class, but you don't normally have these conversations with even your friends a lot of the time. But it has made me more open with my personal friends as well, which is interesting. So that's been really fun. But I would say that the group environment is really valuable. And as I think this method and the Justice method is really helpful, especially if you have confusion or hesitation with cervical mucus. I think that's a really great thing about the method, and getting all of Lisa's experience over the years as well is super valuable.
Oh, thanks, Emma. It's kind of funny when you think about it. I mean, I've been talking about this stuff for a long time. So, like, even I meet like men, like friends of the family or whatever, and it's whenever you're having conversation with me, the word vagina is very likely to drop. It's just a thing. I had a conversation this morning with a group of my business friends who are not into vagina. Like, I shouldn't say into, who isn't into vaginas, but whose businesses do not revolve around the menstrual cycle. And it's like, yeah. So yeah, the word vagina is making a regular appearance. But my point is that you don't really think about it necessarily until you're in a group like that, how little you do talk to your friends about this stuff in this type of depth. Because I'm sure many of the listeners now have had conversations with their friends about cervical mucus and stuff, maybe, but most of us don't.
Right. Yeah.
And certainly not in a place where you can feel very, very comfortable asking about these bodily fluids and all these types of things. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that's what this is all about. Because it's one of those things that we should be able to talk about, and it just should be part of the normal conversation. And I'm thinking back to what you said about, when you learn this method, that's when you kind of looked at your vulva and started to know more about your body parts. And I'm thinking, yes, because that's a very common experience, but what is wrong with the world when this is not just how it is? When you're learning about anatomy. I remember learning a lot of detail about my ears and eyes. I feel like the shoe's got to drop. But with that, Emma, I won't keep you longer. Thank you so much for coming on the show and for sharing your experience. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm really excited to share it. And so thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/329. I hope that you enjoyed my episode with Emma. It was such an important conversation that really needed to be had. And a few of the themes that really came out in today's conversation, of course, fear is a big one. The fear of being off of hormonal contraceptives. And really, I would love just to take a minute and consider, how is it that we got to the place in our society, in our culture, where we equate being off of hormonal contraceptives, meaning being in your natural body, with automatically being pregnant? And how did we get to the point where we don't even think that non-hormonal methods could work and be effective? And we don't give ourselves enough credit, that it's we don't think we're smart enough or capable enough to use non-hormonal contraceptive methods. And if it's not talked about and you have a population that is not educated about it, then why would they feel confident in it? And so I've been thinking about this and thinking about, why is it that when I was 18, my decision to come off the pill, it was more health. And I actually didn't think that the pill was going to be more effective for me than a condom. I actually thought that they would be about the same. It's just that the condom wouldn't mess with my hormones, and then I would be able to have an opportunity to know what was really going on with my body. So for me, it wasn't in my mind, when I made that choice over 20 years ago, it wasn't okay, if I go off the pill, I'm going to get pregnant. It was literally these are my options. But these days, even condoms, we don't trust them. We don't think they're going to work. Many women don't even know how to use them correctly. And I know this because when I'm teaching these same things, many women don't even know that you can't use oil with condoms. So if you didn't know, if this is the first time you're hearing it, now you know. But yeah, you can't use oil with condoms. It doesn't matter if it's coconut oil or whatever, because it disintegrates them. And if this is the first time you're hearing then go to YouTube and search that, and you'll find a video of someone rubbing oil on a condom, and within minutes, the condom actually disintegrating and snapping. But this is my point. My point is that many people, most women, so we'll start there. Most women have never learned that pregnancy is only possible during a small window of fertility in the menstrual cycle. So first of all, we're the vast majority of human beings are operating on the false notion that women are fertile every day. So of course they're afraid, and we're fertile every day, but we don't know why, because they don't tell us why. They don't explain it to us. They just tell us that that's how it works and leave out the actual biology of our bodies, which is super frustrating. And then in addition to that, we're not really taught or encouraged about non-hormonal methods. So it's really a case of the blind leading the blind, where we're just not really having that knowledge unless you seek it out yourself, right? So if you seek it out yourself and you figure this out on your own, then yeah, sure, you're good. But as a general rule, unless you're doing that, you wouldn't know. So I feel like this episode really highlights the importance of taking that, power back into our hands, educating ourselves, because obviously if we wait for our institutions to do it, it's just not going to happen. But really taking back that control of our fertility, of our sex lives, of our intimate relationships, and how we're negotiating this challenging issue of wanting to enjoy sex with those that we love, but not wanting to have control over when we're going to conceive, wanting to be able to make a choice and to intentionally create that space for babies when we're ready. So I'm just really glad that I was able to share this conversation with you. It just, to me, really highlights the importance of why we all need to know about our bodies and how they work, so that we don't have to live our lives in fear of unplanned pregnancies, so that we can really just understand how our bodies work and make informed choices about how we're going to manage fertility. So with that said, I'm going to leave you with that. Have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're listening to the show. And of course, As always, until next time, be well and happy charting.